Sources of land law, normative legal acts adopted by state-authorized bodies, which contain legal norms governing public land relations in accordance with the land policy of the state. We can classify them by 1. By legal force. Constitution of Ukraine, international agreements approved by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, laws of Ukraine. Bylaws, normative acts of local executive bodies and local self-government bodies, case law, legal custom, legal doctrine. According to the focus on the regulation of land relations are divided into regulations adopted for the purpose of direct regulation of land relations and regulations aimed at regulating related relations, civil, environmental, agricultural, urban, which contain land law. 3. Depending on the law-making body that has adopted the rules of land law, divided into normative acts of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, President of Ukraine, Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, central executive bodies, local executive bodies, local self-government bodies, Constitutional Court of Ukraine, other bodies. Depending on the abstractness, generality, of land law, divided into codified, systematic regulations, and non-codified acts. By action in time is divided into permanent, unlimited and temporary. Limited in time. By action in space are divided into national, extending to the entire territory of Ukraine, and local, operating within the administrative territorial unit. According to nationality, they are divided into acts of national law and acts of international law. According to the method of regulating land relations, the norms of the Constitution can be divided into two groups. 1. Norms that indirectly regulate land relations, and 2. Norms that directly regulate land relations. The norms that indirectly regulate land relations include the provisions of Chapter 1 of the Constitution of Ukraine, general principles on the characteristics of the state as a sovereign and independent, democratic, social and legal, form of government, distribution of state power, recognition and guarantee of local self-government, recognition and operation of the rule of law. These norms enshrine the foundations of social and state order, which affects land policy and land relations. The second group includes rules that directly regulate land relations. Art. 13. Which declares the land an object of property of the Ukrainian people and recognizes the right of every citizen to use natural objects of property of the people. Art. 14. According to which the land is the main national wealth, which is under special protection of the state. Land ownership is guaranteed. This right is acquired and exercised by citizens, legal entities and the state exclusively in accordance with the law. Art. 16. According to which, ensuring environmental security and maintaining ecological balance in Ukraine, overcoming the consequences of the Chernobyl disaster, a catastrophe on a global scale, preserving the gene pool of the Ukrainian people is the duty of the state. Laws are divided into codified and non-codified. The Land Code of Ukraine is a general industry codified act and forms the basis of current land legislation, which develops and complements it. Most of its norms are norms of direct action. Legislation of other branches related to the regulation of land relations can also be distinguished, in particular. Civil Code, on transactions with land, contractual obligations, inheritance of land, Tax Code, on land tax, Forest Code, for forestry lands, Water Code, for water fund lands. Subsoil Code of Ukraine, on the use of land for mining, Criminal Code, on land crimes, Code of Ukraine on administrative offenses, on offenses in the field of land protection. Non-codified acts of the system of sources of land law include laws, which you can read below. General sources are characterized by the coverage of a large array of social relations, including land. Such laws include the laws you can read below. Special laws. They regulate only a certain area of public relations, which includes, in particular, land law. These include the laws you can read below. Bylaws as sources of land law are normative legal acts that express the land policy of the state, do not contradict the Constitution of Ukraine, the Land Code of Ukraine, the laws of Ukraine, and develop and detail their provisions. Bylaws as sources of land law form a complex hierarchical system. They can be classified according to various criteria. 1. By subjects of publication. Land legal acts of the head of state, government, central and local bodies of state executive power, bodies and officials of local self-government, etc. 2. Within the competence of the law-making body and the scope of the act, general, departmental, local. The general ones include, in particular, normative acts, for example, of the President, of the government, which are obligatory for execution on the whole territory of the state. Departmental sources of land law are land legal regulations of bodies of special competence, the Ministry of State Committees, which apply only to organizations and individuals of the ministry. There are interdepartmental sources of land law. Local sources of land law include regulations of local executive bodies and local governments, the scope of which is limited to the relevant territory. 3. According to the external form of the act, decrees, resolutions, orders, decisions, orders, etc. 4. By the nature of legislative competence, for example, normative acts of the head of state, and adopted in the order of implementation of delegated powers, for example, normative acts of local self-government bodies. 5. By time of action, permanent and temporary. 6. According to the procedure of adoption, land legal acts issued personally, for example, by the head of the ministry, and adopted collectively, for example, by the Cabinet of Ministers. Taking into account the provisions of the Constitution and laws of Ukraine, there are such types of bylaws as sources of land law, which you can read below. Thank you for your attention.